Okay. Really quickly, I do want to look at one other thing in Canvas. Just to make sure that you've got your notifications set up correctly so that when I do an announcement, you get notified for an email. So if you open up, it doesn't matter which of your Canvas classes that you're looking at. Hopefully you've got ours open right now. But if you go up to on the top left-hand side to your account name and you click on this, and you come down to click on notifications. In notifications, it'll populate what you're getting notified about for all kinds of things right here. You need to come down. Your screen is going to look different than mine because I'm a teacher, you're a student, but you would come down here and under announcements, you want to make sure that that's set up to receive by email. If you somehow it's lost and that doesn't appear to be working for you or you can't figure that part out, this is the YouTube, there's a YouTube video about exactly how to set that up right here. And you can actually whip out your phone and shoot a picture of this screen right here. That's the address to get to how you get email notifications. So for what that's worth. Okay. So I need everybody to open up Photoshop for me really quickly. Couple things that I want to talk about here just really quickly. My screen is going to look very different than your screen, your version of Photoshop. This is the retouching space that I'm going to strongly suggest that you use in this class. We are going to build this together, so don't worry about if you don't have it right now. You do not have to use this space. What I can tell you is this. It's optimized for doing the work that we do in Photoshop. So if you're going to be retouching, compositing, whatever, this is really set up to give you the greatest amount of access with the least amount of pain. So again, but that does not mean that you have to use this space. If you prefer to have, if you've got your own custom space, you can work in that. If you prefer to just use what Photoshop gives you, you can do that too. That's not what I care about. And on that very same note, there's people who do these kinds of classes, whatever, that are absolute Nazis about keyboard shortcuts and all of that kind of shit. I've already told you, I don't have a good memory. I'm not the guy who's going to remember Command-Shift-Delete plus P and R will do this for you. I will never remember that. I don't even try. There are a handful of keyboard shortcuts that I use all the time. I will show you what those are. There's actually a few things that you can't do in Photoshop without really causing yourself hurt that are keyboard shortcut dependent. I will talk to you about those as well. But that is not what this class is about. You will never get a test on keyboard shortcuts. That is meaningless to all of you. If you can go up to the menu and select it and come down, why not? So anyway, just the way that I work. But that will explain what you're actually looking at right here. So I just wanted you to realize that, again, wow, why is this looking so different? While we are on this topic here, how many of you guys have got beta versions of Photoshop installed? There are beta shop versions that exist. So if you go to your Creative Cloud, you can actually look under the beta versions and they'll be, but that makes you a tester for Adobe. The stuff that they have in beta, the changes that they have made are not stable. And so as a consequence, they've tagged it as a beta. They're hoping that you are going to download the beta and work with it, and when something fucks up, then you let Adobe know it fucked up and they know what to fix. But is that really your job? They're certainly not going to pay you for it. So it's an interesting thing to do if all of a sudden, like when they released their first iterations into AI, that it was all released as beta, and people were very excited about, well, I want to try that out. So I'm not saying you can't download them, but I would not make that the place that you work all your time. If you want to go play around, great. If you, whatever. Does that sort of make sense? All right, just kind of word. How many of you are on the latest, greatest version of whatever OS exists? So you're on Windows 11, whatever just got released, and you're on Mac, Sonoma, getting ready to go to Sequoia. And if you don't know what you're on, it doesn't really matter so much anyway. But I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Just, again, I came to this as a professional. I came here as a working photographer. To give you some idea of a brief part of my history, where I made it, and I'm only doing this not because I have the ego, but because I think it's important that you know I have got a certain credibility given my history. I opened my first studio in Chicago in 1981. I was only shooting for Playboy at the time. I got really tired of doing nudes, so I sold my studio here. I moved to Milan for 8 years to learn how to shoot fashion. I came back to Chicago in 1991 and opened a studio and kept it there until 2008. In 1999, I opened my second studio in New York City and had that for 15 years. People ask me, well, how well did you do in that? And what I say to them is that I made it to the major leagues, and I played there for 15 or 20 years. I never made it to the All-Stars, but I was that close. You're getting 40 years here. So when I talk about some of these things, it's coming from that experience. So to bring that back to the latest, greatest on your computer, I upgrade my computer when some clandestine person shows up in the middle of the night at my apartment with a gun and puts it to my head and says, update your system software now, and no other time. You guys are asking for a world of hurt. Every time you upgrade, shit gets broken. Can you imagine that, okay, yeah, I'm going to upgrade my stuff tonight and I've got a really big important job tomorrow, and all of a sudden you burn your computer and you can't get Photoshop to work and you can't get Capture One to launch because you upgraded your shit. Personally, I stay 2 systems behind. I'm working now in version 13. Well, here, I'll show you what I'm working in. Monterey, version 12.6. And as long as it runs everything that I'm running, nothing breaks for me. I don't run into any problems. How many of you keep running into problems? All of a sudden shit just doesn't work. So do what you want. I am just telling you, I keep this as bulletproof as I possibly can. There's no advantage for me to have the next latest thing that Photoshop decided to do, because it's probably going to break the connection to my printer. Or I'm going to lose all my ICC profiles, or, oh wow, my phone book doesn't work anymore. Or, just throwing it out there. Okay, Photoshop. First thing we're going to do is set Photoshop up to work properly. But the first thing we're going to do is what happens when weird shit is happening in Photoshop. 9 times out of 10, it's your preferences. So if all of a sudden you can't get a brush to work like a brush, you pick, just a regular brush and it works like the selection tool or something. It just wonky shit happens, right? Or all of a sudden your screen starts to literally disintegrate. It doesn't physically fall apart, but it gives you that. You'll see tiling will happen. All of a sudden your image will like break apart into discrete little squares and move around. There's all sorts of shit that'll happen, right? If that happens, it is because your preferences have been corrupted and you need to reset them. So I need everybody to quit Photoshop right now, because the only way you can reset them is to quit Photoshop first. So go ahead and quit it. And then there are 2 keyboard shortcuts that we are going to deal with here. I'm going to read them out to you. I want you to actually do these so that you go through the process of doing this. But when we get to the, okay, do you want to really reset them, hit no. We're not going to reset ours. I actually did this once in this classroom, and everybody was on the school computers and they reset all the preferences. And I got the nastiest email from IT that you can possibly imagine, because they had to go back in and reset them all. Yeah, one machine at a time. Yeah, they were not happy. But at any rate, all right, so I've quit Photoshop. So this is a keyboard shortcut again. It's the only way to do this. So if you are on Windows, you hold down the Alt, Control, and Shift key. If you're on a Macintosh, you hold down the Option, Command, Shift key. So I'm going to hold down my Option, Command, and Shift key all with one hand. And then, hear me out first, you're going to start Photoshop and continue to hold those keys down until you get a dialog box. So I'm going to hold mine down. I'm going to click on Photoshop. I'm still holding them down. And I get this. And it says, do you want to delete the Photoshop settings files? And you would say yes. Do not say yes. But this is how you would fix your problem. What happens now is this is going to return Photoshop to its shipping state. Yes? So the Windows keys are Alt, Control, Shift, and then start Photoshop. Anyway, all the work that we're going to do here, setting up your preferences, that's what we're going to spend a good part of the next hour doing, whatever. You will lose all of that, and you'll have to do it all over again. But we are going to circumvent that. Once we get your preferences set correctly, we are going to then grab all of those files and save them in a different place. So that if you ever have to do this, you simply take the ones that you saved and plug it back into one folder, and you will have all of your shit back the way it's supposed to be. Anyway, say no right now. And ask yourself, is that really the best image that they could come up with as their splash screen? Okay. So we are going to set up your preferences for a number of reasons to do a number of things. Again, everything that I tell you right now is a suggestion, and I'm going to tell you why I think you should do it. If you don't want to do it, there's a couple of things that are actually a preference, stylistic preference for me that I just don't like the way this happens. You may love the way that thing happens. Don't change it. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to make you a copy of me. If that was the case, I would just give you all of these preferences and say load them and you have to use them. That's not what I'm like. I want you to understand why it is we're doing what we are doing, because that helps you understand how Photoshop functions. And if you understand how Photoshop functions, you can make Photoshop your bitch. So, in the Macintosh world, you start up at the drop-down menu that says Macintosh, and you come down to Preferences and across to General, and it will bring up the Preference dialog box. In Windows, I think it's the Edit menu at the bottom. Is that where it is? Yeah, it's the Edit menu down at the bottom. So at any rate, when your thing opens up, it will look like this. You'll see on the left side there's a whole series of sub-windows that we're going to be able to look at, and then there's the options that sit in the middle. So if you go on the left-hand side, we're going to start at the very top at General, and then we're going to work our way down, and we should be good to go. So again, this is one of the few times I'm going to ask everybody if they're on this page. Yes? So up to the Photoshop menu, down to Preferences, and across to General. You can actually pick any of these. It'll open up the same window, but this just picks General as the starting point. All right, we all good? Okay. So in the General part at the very top, you can leave all the color pickers, all that kind of stuff at their normal part. Three things that I change in here. The first one is that I uncheck this auto show the home screen. I fucking hate that thing. It is a place for Adobe to advertise shit and sell shit to me, and I already pay them enough money, and I hate it, so I don't want to see it, so I uncheck it. The next one down, use legacy new document interface. This is what happens when you hit Command N or you go up to the file menu and do I want a new window, and a new thing opens up. In the current version of Photoshop, there's a lot of presets in there. It's just really a confusing space. One of the things that it's just more difficult. I prefer the old new dialog box. So for me, I check this use legacy new document interface. It's It strips out all the bells and whistles that they've added, and it just gets to the nuts and bolts. What do you really want to do? I want to create a document that is 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. I want this resolution, and I want this background. Hit OK. Or if they've got a window open, I want the exact same resolution dimensions as that window. Or I want you to build me a file of whatever's on the clipboard. I mean, all of that is just incredibly simple. They've made it so much more difficult, and they think it looks pretty. And anyway, so I changed that. This use legacy free transform, you also want to click on that. Now, if you are the people who are in the one category, you may not know what any of this means. Do not worry. When we get to doing transforming, you will see exactly what it is. So if any things that I'm looking at here are talking about you just are not familiar with, don't worry about that part. We're going to get to that, okay? And when we do get into transforms, you're going to learn all of that. One of the issues, and again, this is going to be over pretty much everybody's head here, but I'm going to throw it out. One of the issues that we have when we're doing compositing is transforming. So what transforming means is that you can rescale something. You can make it bigger, smaller. You can skew stuff. You can distort it. You can do all those. Those are transforms. One of the things that we have to do, though, in compositing work is transform, scale in perspective. You cannot do it if you do not check this checkbox. If you use the current version of transform, it breaks the keyboard shortcuts that we need to use to transform in perspective. So again, if you don't understand that part, just check this box anyway. If you haven't done a lot of transforming, whatever, this isn't basically what happens in this is that in the old version of transforming, if you were to open the transform dialog box and you were to change the width, the height would not change. You had to hold down the shift key in order to get them to keep their ratio. In the new version of Photoshop, they flip that. In the new version of Photoshop, they are automatically connected width and height. The ratio is automatically linked. You hold down the shift key to break it. Again, that kills our ability to transform in perspective, which is a completely different animal. So anyway, that's why I checked this. Beep when done. Definitely check that. And the reason you want to do that is that we will get files in this room. How many people in here have gotten files larger than a gigabyte? If you've got a file larger than a gigabyte and you want to run a lens blur on that baby, that thing can take 5-10 minutes to do it. I don't want to sit here and stare at my screen for 10 minutes. I would much rather, another screen, watch a little porn. No, I want to know. I want Photoshop to tell me, okay, we're done. And then I can come back to it, right? So, and there's no overhead on it. How many of you guys, by default, they have export clipboard. How many people in this room have ever copied something in Photoshop and taken it to another program on the clipboard? Ever. It doesn't happen. Nobody uses the clipboard to do that. Nobody. And the clipboard is memory intensive. So if you put a gigabyte image on a clipboard, you lose a gigabyte of your RAM. And if you only got 8 gigabytes of RAM, that's 15% of your computer you've just kissed off. Nobody does this shit. So you definitely want to uncheck that thing. The rest of it, you can leave it at its defaults. Then we're going to go to the next space down on the left-hand side, the interface. If you click on interface, I'm going to leave mine at its default. It's the dark gray area, and basically that's what it's talking about is the coloring of all the UI, the user interface of Photoshop. So if you look at like all the palettes and all the kind of stuff in here, it's all this gray color. You can actually change it to other colors, but there's a downside to changing it to other colors. If you change it to black, it gets to be really, well here, you can try it. You can click on black, you'll see. It can get to be really difficult to start to distinguish between certain palettes and certain other things. It just becomes problematic. What's more problematic, it's a better place to be though than the lighter grays. When you start getting into the lighter grays, what ends up happening here is this is a color issue for your eyes. So how many of you guys know in photography that back in the days of film that they used to make a film that was color balanced for tungsten and another one that was color balanced for daylight, right? Anybody not aware of that part? Because if you're not, it's not that big of a deal. Nobody shoots film, so, but at any rate, The white that you see, like these are these lights over here. These are all incandescent tungsten lights, basically, and I don't think any of these are balanced for daylight. These are all balanced for the tungsten, which is warmer than daylight. So how many of you guys have seen pictures where there's a window that's showing the outside during the daytime, but then there's a lamp on that's also hitting the wall, right? And if the lamp is color corrected, the outside's really blue, and if the outside's corrected and normal looking, then the inside, the lamp is really, really warm. That's all got to do, that's an issue that exists in what we would call well, it's the film world, the digital world, all of that kind of stuff. Your eyes don't work that way. What your eyes do, because your eyes don't notice that difference. When you look at that, you can say, well, yeah, it's a little bit warmer than that, which is a little bit bluer, but you don't really have that sense of it. And the reason you don't is your eyes adapt to it. And the way they adapt is that your eyes look at the brightest thing in a scene and white balances it, regardless of what it is. So if you use these lighter UIs that surround it, your white balancing is based on the UI, not on what is in your image. You want the brightest thing on your screen to be your image, because that is how you can have a legitimate color perception of what you're looking at. The surround will screw you. Does that make sense? And the lighter version, this one, is even worse. So I stick with this guy right here. How many of you guys have a picture of your pet as your screensaver, as your desktop, or something else, right? You got a stop sign there because you really like stop signs, or it's a picture of your girlfriend or your boyfriend, or it's a picture of you because you're just in love with yourself, right? Those are all problematic, because if any of that is visible while you're trying to do your work, it can have an impact on your image. And so if your screen, your desktop, your wallpaper of your desktop, whatever, is throwing off your color perception, then your vision of your images has been thrown off as well. Make sense? So anyway, I set this way while I'm at it, and I can't show you how to do this in Windows, but it's just something to consider. For my desktop in a Mac world, if you go to your Apple menu, which you can do with this thing still open, and come down to System Preferences. Some of you, for the latest, greatest version of OS, will be called System Settings, I think. Yeah. Anyway, you're looking up at the very top for Desktop and Screensavers. That's the one that you're actually going to look for. And then in your Desktop tab, you select this, and then there's a set of canned ones that already exist. So you can do like the mountains and all that kind of stuff. Your best bet is to get as close to the gray of that Photoshop as you can get, and that should be your desktop color space for serious retouching. So all the pictures of your puppy or your mother or your whatever, save it for something else. Anyway, as we go down through the rest of this, I'm going to leave this exactly at its defaults. Some people will change the UI font size. So some people find this like history shit and action stuff. They find it too small to see. A lot of that can actually come from having your screen set to too fine of a resolution. Nonetheless, you can change the UI font size right here. I don't know that you really need to do that, so I'm just going to move on. The next thing down on the left-hand side is going to be Workspace. In Workspace, this is where it really becomes something how you like your programs to behave. And I'm just going to tell you why I do what I do, and then you can make your own decision. But there's two things that I change here. The first one is open documents as tabs. And what that basically means, most of you guys know what tab behavior is like. You have it in browsers. I love it in browsers, but I hate it in Photoshop. But basically, if you open two images in Photoshop, one of them will exist as an image and the other will actually exist as a tab. And you can go back and forth between the two. The problem with that is that when we get into very serious compositing, you need to have access to multiple images at the same time so that you know what you're clicking on to select and where you're dragging it to. Now, if you're the kind of person that can have 6 tabs open and you can remember what every single tab really is, you can drag and drop between your image that's visible on screen and any one of those tabs. Again, I don't have a memory. I don't remember that shit. So I don't want this to happen. I want to see discrete different images. If shit gets in my way, I'll just dock an image. I can actually send something down to the dock and then pull it back up later again. But so I uncheck that. I don't like tab document. And then the second one I'd turn off is this enable floating document. And what that is that if you actually do have an image that has been pulled off, so you've got a tab, you tore it off, it becomes just your image, you take that image and you bring it up close to the top again to where the tabs are, it will then re-become a tab again. Again, I shut all of this behavior down. If you love that behavior and it works for you, don't change this. It does not work for me, so I change mine. The rest of this you can leave. It's normal. Tools are the next one down. So in the tooltip dialog box, I do keep on show tooltips, especially when people are learning. It's a very smart thing to do. I don't use rich tooltips. What those are, it's now actually an addition that's been put on. So if some of you may know this and didn't know what it was, whatever, but now when you hover over a tool, so if you do the show tooltips, basically if you hover over a tool, it'll basically just tell you what the tool is, and it usually will give you its keyboard shortcut. But rich tooltips will actually give you a small little thumbnail size video of how to use the tool, of what you do with it. So if you are brand new to Photoshop, whatever, rich tooltips might be something that you want to keep on. I don't keep it on because I find the behavior really annoying. I'm just trying to get to something and all of a sudden I got this little video playing and it's just annoying me. So I unchecked the show rich tooltips. The gestures, all that kind of stuff can stay the same. Looking down here, all the same, all the same. All of that, rest of that can stay at its default. The rest of it should be pretty much the same default that I'm looking at. History, the next one down. So in history, what this is about is keeping track of what you do. And it's by default, it's turned off. And there is no reason for you to really necessarily have to turn this on, with one exception. There are a number of people in here who have said they actually think that they might want to have a career in Photoshop, right? As a retoucher. So we go back to our example. You're going to charge me 140 bucks to do, 150 bucks to do that one retouching job, right? And I've agreed to do that, right? And I send you the file. You do the retouching and you come back to me and you say, well, here it is. And I look at it and I go, well, yeah, the image looks great, but it couldn't take you 10 minutes to do that. Whatever, I'm not paying you the 150 bucks. I'll give you 10. And you look at me and say, well, that wasn't what I agreed on, whatever. I mean, how many of you people have had shit like this happen to you in life, right? There was a promise made, a contract, and all of a sudden somebody's going back on it. It happens all the time. Well, that's not worth it. You didn't do anything. You'll get this. This thing right here is how you avoid it. So, if you turn on history log, you will see that what it can do is you have options up at the top. You have metadata, text, or both, and then you have what you can actually log. If you take a look at the drop down, sessions only is, I think, the default. Yeah, mine is. So I'm going to set mine the way yours typically would. And is metadata the default? Okay, so this is how yours should have looked when you opened it up. So what this basically means, this setup right now, is that every single time you open a raw file, it's going to timestamp it. It's going to say that file was opened on this day. And then every time you close it, it's going to timestamp it again. And that will just grow. It's a small little file that sits in your metadata. And metadata is a part of all, well, you'll have in sidecar files, it'll be for a raw file. In regular files, a TIFF file, a Photoshop file, a JPEG, all of those contain the metadata. This stamp will actually be on it. It doesn't really do you any good. There's no real value in doing this. It's just, I opened it on this day, I closed it on this day, I opened it on this day, and that's it. It's just a long list, right? That doesn't mean anything. If you click on text file, it'll actually give you an option to choose something, and you would click on it and choose it. And what this will do is it'll do the very same information, opening and closing, whatever, in a text file. And it stays on, so every time you open that file up, it's going to write this information into that text file. Again, it doesn't help you very much. But, thing to note here, your text file, when you click on that choose, you're able to name the text file. It should be named with the very same name that you're using for your files. That naming convention that I showed you guys, you remember that? So that naming convention, the way it works out is that there, at the very end of it, there's a 3-digit extension. If it's a CR2, that means it's a RAW file for Canon. If it's an NEF, it's a RAW file for Nikon. Canon shooters in here? Nikon shooters? Sony shooters? Yeah, so in Sony it's AWR or ARW. I can never remember what it is. Yeah, okay, so the beauty of that file naming system is that when you make a Photoshop file of it, it has the very same name, except instead of having CR2, it's actually got PSD, Photoshop extension. If you make a JPEG of it, it's a JPEG, but the name is the same. If you make a TIFF file of it, the name is the same except for that extension. This retouching history just gets a text a part that gets put on the end of it. So everything is cohesive and together. So if a year from now you need to look up the history of how you retouched that raw file, you can find it because all the names are the same. Make sense? And you should keep them together. Wherever that file ends up residing is where this file should go. But I haven't really given you a compelling reason. I've already told you it's meaningless to do all this shit. Oh, by the way, and you can also do it for both. If you click on both, it'll do your text file and it'll also do your metadata. I don't suggest ever bearing this in your metadata. That's only really happens, and it's only really good for you. But the text file is different, and here's why it's different. If you click on the text file and you come down to session only, instead do concise, what concise will do is it will actually do every change of tool that you've done, or anything in Photoshop. So if you add a layer, it records that. If you change to the healing brush, it records that. If you make a selection, it records that. It'll record everything about that part, right? But that's still not what you really want. What you really want is this. It is the detailed version of it. What the detailed version does, every opening and closing, every tool that you select, but every single move that you make in Photoshop. So I have got my graphics tablet right here. I'm going to do 1.2.3. All three of those motions get recorded in this history. You retouch for 4 hours. You have a phone book. Your text file will now be 500 pages long. And so then when you go to your client and they say, well, you didn't do anything, it's not worth it, I'm only giving you $10 instead of the 150, you whip out the phone book that is the entire history of what you did and say, I did that, you fucker, give me my money. It's exhaustive. It can get to be thousands of pages. And somebody goes, well, you didn't do anything. You show them a file or printout. Printout is much more effective. Thousands of pages. This is what I did to your file, give me my money. They don't argue. Just thinking ahead. For the time being, we're not using that because none of you guys are doing that kind of work. So I'm going to uncheck that history log. File handling, the next thing down. This I'm going to leave it at its defaults. Does anybody get that whole little, every time you're trying to save something, it'll come up, you'll get a warning every time you try to save a file, and it'll say things like, oh, do you want this to be complete, maximum compatibility, whatever. They've gotten rid of a lot of that in here, but this is used to be where you would actually come in and actually change things in here. So there's a lot of stuff in here I don't change, but there is one massive thing in here that is critical to all of us. And it's up at the very top. It's on the right-hand side. It's the third check mark down. Automatically save recovery information every. You need to turn that on. And then in the drop-down menu, I do mine every 10 minutes. Every 5 minutes can get to be a little onerous. But what this is that this saves a recovery file of your work every 10 minutes. It's an invisible file to you. You don't ever see it, and you won't ever need it until you need it. But if Photoshop crashes in the middle of it, and you haven't saved your work, this file is a saved copy of your work, at least up until its last save. So if you actually, it does a save and you go 9 minutes and 59 seconds doing something else, that last 9 minutes and 59 seconds will not be saved, but all of your other work will be. Would you rather lose everything or lose 9 minutes and 59 seconds of it? This is a game changer. How many of you guys have ever hit the dreaded scratch disk is full and you can't quit, you can't save, you can't do anything? this thing will pull your ass out of a sling, because at least it will have saved you up to the last. Again, the max you will lose on it is just shy of 10 minutes. Why they don't have this as a default? Adobe hates you. You know that, right? But I'm a fair player in all of this. I think it should be equal. I hate them. The worst of necessary evils. I shouldn't really be saying this. Someday Adobe is going to approach me and say, do you want a job? And I'll say, sure, I'd love a job, whatever. You're Adobe. You got money. And then they're going to actually go back and review. So, because I'm recording this and going to put it online, right? And there's some AI out there right now that's scrubbing everything that I say, and every time the word Adobe comes up, it's getting flagged in Adobe server somewhere. And so I know it's true story. I was, in my very first days at Playboy, I was an assistant, and they used to always tap the assistants to do stupid little pictures that they would put for this, anytime they could get somebody partially naked, they would. So they used to have this section in the back of the magazine that was just about weird shit that you could buy. And one of the weird shit things that you could buy was a baseball hat that had antlers. Don't ask me why. It was a novelty thing. Anyway, we got it, and I'm sure it said something cute on the front of it. Well, anyway, so they said to me, Verser, will you model this? And I was like, and I'm just there. I'm in my mid-20s, and I'm like, sure, I'll model it. So they put the hat on me. I have no shirt on. I got pants on, but no shirt on, and then a naked girl under each arm. And I'm sitting here like this, staring at the camera, and what I swear to God, what goes through my mind is that if you had any hope of a career as a politician, you just ended it. Yeah, I have no idea where I went down that road, but nonetheless. Okay, so the rest of this stuff, you can actually leave it at its default. Export, I'm going to leave this as it is right now. I'm going to show you how I do export images to actually use on a website. Basically how I create JPEGs. Again, it's somewhat of a legacy process, but I think it gives you more control and that kind of stuff. You can leave this as PNG. If all the time, all you ever export from Photoshop is going to be a JPEG, you can click on this drop down and change it to a JPEG. It'll just make things faster for you. I don't really care which one of these I'll leave it at. So I'm going to leave this at its default. But again, this part right here in the quick export, the convert to sRGB, the reason most people would do this is that, even though we're going to talk quite a bit about color spaces, is that sRGB is the color space of the web, period. So if you're exporting stuff that's destined for your website, for Instagram, for anything that is web content, whatever, it should be in sRGB. It is the only color space that those programs actually truly respect and understand. So it's not the space that we will be working in this class, but it is the space that you would use as a destination for web. So at any rate, next one down, performance. Speaking of, how many of you guys have more than 8 gigabytes RAM in your computer? What do you guys have? What do you have? 64? This applies to you. Mario? 16? 16, this might apply. If you have 8 gigabytes of RAM, this doesn't necessarily apply. What this is basically saying is that how much memory in your computer do you want to dedicate to Photoshop? The thing is that in doing work in Photoshop, you need to have the most amount of RAM available to you possible. However, there's other things on your computer that need RAM. Your computer itself, just the OS, needs RAM. So you can't crank this number up. So you'll see there's a sliding scale. The default for Photoshop is always 70%, regardless of how much you have in there. If you've got 64 gigabytes of RAM, what most people would say to you is that a safe number, because you have such a large amount, a safe number for your OS would be 8 gigabytes. There's no way your OS is going to need more than that. So conceivably, you could take that 64, subtract 8 from it, just to have as a buffer for your OS, and then that would give you 56 gigabytes of RAM dedicated to Photoshop. Your Photoshop will scream faster and be so much more nimble. So now comes the part nobody wants to hear. How many of you guys have a browser open when you're working in Photoshop and doing your retouching? Oh, raise it up high, admit it. And if you're not raising your hand right now, you're fucking lying to me. All of us do it, right? How many of you guys use Chrome? Most of you. It's the worst of them. Browsers are memory hogs. And the thing is that it's stealing memory that Photoshop could be using to make your work go really fast. But you have a browser open, you've got your mail open, you've got your messages open, you've got your calendar open, you've got a copy of Word open because you were doing something 3 days ago and you never bothered to close that shit because it doesn't make you. All of these are thieves of memory. If you're going into a serious session of Photoshop, get music on your phone. Get your browser on your phone. Do not do it on your computer. You will kill yourself. This is what really matters in performance. Does that make sense? So don't run anything. There are people I know that actually create a user just called Photoshop, meaning when they log in, that the only process that will ever be available to them is Photoshop. So everything other than the OS, again, still needs space, but other than that, Photoshop gets it all. And this, again, we're talking about time. Time is money. Speed is money. If I can get a filter to work in half the time, then I've cut the time it took in half. Wow, that sounded really prophetic, didn't it? Whew. This guy's deep. How many of you guys have, this is a really esoteric one, but nonetheless, ever been working in Liquify and had your image break up and look like checkerboards? Has that happened to anyone in here? Really memory intensive processes that happen in Photoshop can be screwed up by using the graphics card in your in your machine. So if weird things like that start to happen, so you'll go into Liquify's a really evident version of this. If you don't know what Liquify is, don't worry. But it's just weird things start happening. Your stuff that you're trying to push, you're trying to do just a transform, and you're trying to scale something, and it won't work. You know, again, your first thing is to suspect that it's a preference, but your second thing is this right here. Use the graphics processor. So what has happened in Photoshop is that in the old days, you simply had a CPU, a computer, the unit that actually, the processor in your computer that did all the work. And it does all the work for everything. It manages your email, it manages your word processing, it's general, it does everything. Then people started using external monitors, and so they started actually developing cards that had graphics chips on them to drive the monitors. And then Photoshop realized, oh my God, these are processors that are designed only to do graphic work. Well, that's what Photoshop is. So instead of Photoshop relying on a processor that does everything, they could actually send it to a processor that only does graphic stuff and does it much faster, much more efficiently. This was a revolution that happened in Photoshop 10 years ago. You guys are the benefit of it all. But anyway, now every computer in the world that you buy has got a graphics processor in it. It's got a graphics card at least in it, as well as a regular one. Photoshop offloads a lot of its heavy lifting graphics-wise to the graphics processor, to the card that's actually driving your monitor. And that's a great thing, but it can fuck up. And when it fucks up, you get these weird anomalies in your screen. To unfuck it for that part of time that you need it to be working normally, you go in and you uncheck this thing that says use graphic processor. If your Photoshop is going fine, you want this thing turned on because it makes it so much quicker. But again, I can show you time after time after time. It still happens on mine occasionally. If something's, depending on, who knows, the voodoo in the air. I don't know what it is, but I'll get into Liquify and all of a sudden shit is just, you move something and something in a completely different place takes off. I mean, it's unusable. Make sense? All right. Next one down, image processing. This you can leave it almost at its defaults. So this has to do at the very top how you use some of the new tools in Photoshop, and it's just the default behavior. How many people in this room have used Select Subject in Photoshop? It's just a button that exists. If you haven't used it, don't worry, we'll take a look at it. But you have two options. It's an artificial intelligence that does it. you have two options. You can do, one is local, and the way they call it here, if you click on this drop-down menu, they'll say device. That means your computer, and they say it's quicker. If you use your device, then it basically takes whatever resources that Photoshop has baked into the program itself to do the AI to make a selection of your subject. The contention is that you can, or the other option is that you can also do it in the cloud. And what that means is that it's going to take your image, it's going to send it up to Adobe servers, and they're actually going to do the processing there and then return the results back down to you. You have to have an internet connection to do that. You have to be online to do that. There's a lot of people that argue it's better because you're using, Adobe's got much more powerful servers. The algorithms that they can run are much more up to date. They're more powerful, right? And in most cases, it actually does a better job, but it doesn't mean every case. You really need to explore both options. You can select which one you want to use every time you hit the select subject button in Photoshop. All this does is establish the default. Would you rather it upload your shit and do it there, or would you rather have it done by your computer locally? If you would prefer to have it always being done by the cloud, and you don't, the default is to have it local. So you would want to change this. I changed this to being cloud. That's the one I prefer to do on this. Again, it doesn't mean it's always going to be the best one. So, but it's just to know that part. Anything that says more stable and faster, I like to keep, so I'm not going to touch anything else here. Scratch discs. How many people even know what a scratch disc is? But we see it all the time, right? Okay, so one person knows what it is. How many of you have ever gotten the dreaded scratch disc warning? Your scratch disc is full and you cannot proceed. You can't change anything. You can't save the file. You cannot go backwards. All you can do is quit, right? Meaning any work that you didn't save is lost. That's not a good way of working, in my opinion. Okay, so I used to do this. I'm going to pause the recording right now to talk about scratch discs because I got to do it on the board back there. And you can't see that board back there in the video recording. So if you're listening to the video, and I'll do this a couple times over the semester, there's things that are going to need to be done on the whiteboard. It's going to be a pause. If you reach that part in the video that you're following along religiously and you don't remember something or understand whatever, just reach out to me. Versa, could you go over scratch disc again with me, whatever, and we will jump on a Zoom call and get it done. But for the time being right now, I need to explain to you what it is so that you know how to work with it. Wouldn't you say that would be a... So, in Photoshop, you can actually add other discs to be scratch discs for you. So right now, this is the default. It's always going to be your boot hard drive. So whatever is starting your computer is by default set up to be your hard drive. But I have got another little hard drive right here. And I'm going to plug it in. And it's loaded right here. It's this Verser_1TB. And I go back in Photoshop, and I'm going to cancel this, and then I'm going to bring it back. I think I need to do that just to get it to show up. No, it's not going to show up, so hang on. Photoshop gets very finicky about these things. More often than not, you have to do, if you install something, you have to do a restart in order to make sure that Adobe Photoshop is aware of it. And it's not showing up here, and that may be because I just formatted this drive to be compatible for Windows and Mac, and I'm sure that that's why this thing isn't showing up. But it's okay. I've got 2 other partitions that are showing up in here, so we can just go through the process of how you would change it. So you plug in an external hard drive, it will show up here. To enable it, you simply put a check mark on it. If you want to change the order, if you want to say, well, I don't want my internal hard drive to fill up first, I want it to only use this external scratch disk, or if you've got another partition in your, you can change the order of this. So if I say, well, I really want my, what I'm calling my data B drive right here to actually be it, you select it and then you use these arrows and you can put it up at the top. And so now what will happen is that this drive up here, data B, will fill up, and then once it's completely full and there's nowhere else to go, it'll go to your second drive right here and it'll start to fill it up. And then I could add the third drive here, and this is just the order that it all happens in. So you can do these things to change these things. However, my suggestion to you is that without getting too deep into this, unless you are working really with really gigantic files and a whole lot of them, that kind of stuff, whatever, you can avoid this by following some very simple rules about the available space that's actually on the hard drive that you're using in your computer. But remember, just because you've got a hard drive and you add an external hard drive to it and you think, well, I've got a lot of space right here, unless you go in and actually activate it and put it in its proper space, it won't be used. Make sense? But this is a way to avoid that problem. The better way to avoid that problem is to have everybody write this down. You want a minimum of 10% free space on your internal hard drive. So what that means is that if you've got a 250 gigabyte hard drive, you want 25 megabytes of available space. If you have a 1 terabyte hard drive, you want to have 250 gigabytes of available space. If you have 2 terabyte hard, it's all just 10% of this. I'm sorry, that was wrong. If you have a 1 terabyte hard drive, you want to have 100 gigabytes of available space. 10%. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so how do you find out how much space you've got? Oh, by the way, once you make these changes right here, you have to do a restart of Photoshop. Not of your computer, but of Photoshop. This does not take effect until after a restart. However, this is sticky, so it will stay this way until you go in and change it. So you need to remember that you've actually modified this. For me, I'm not going to modify it, so I'm going to uncheck that. I'm going to move my boot drive back up to its place, whatever. But now you know what it is and what you should be looking for. There used to be other strategies that are involving scratch disks to make them work faster, but with SSDs, which is what most people are doing today, you don't really need them. To find out how much space that you've actually got in your computer, in the Macintosh world, you go to your Finder. I'm going to hide everybody else. I'm going to close my windows. If you don't have your hard disks showing, which by default they don't show anymore, which I think is a problem, but nonetheless, to get them to show, you come up to your Finder window, down to Preferences, and under General, you check all of these. You want everything that's connected to your computer to show. If you click on hard disk, then all of a sudden your boot drive will show up. If you then click on your boot drive and either go over to the File menu and come down to Get Info, or hit the keyboard shortcut for Command I, this will tell you this, give you information about your computer right here. And up here at the very top, you can see it says capacity 1 TB, available 264 gigabytes. That means I have roughly 26% free space on this, and I do not need to worry about scratch disks. I would be shocked if anybody in this room has that much space, free space on their internal hard drive. You are asking for problems. Get your shit off of your internal hard drive. Lose the movies, lose the photos, the shit that you haven't worked on in years. It doesn't belong there. Offload it onto a hard drive that you call archive and keep it there, but get it off. You need to free space up on your computer. Most people would tell you without 10% free space, your OS is actually wonky. So So in the Windows world, I think you go to Control Panel Storage. There's another way you can get to it in Mac as well. The other thing for Mac is you can come up to About This Mac. This is more like the Windows version. You click on Storage and it will give you the exact same information right here. It'll tell you that this is available out of the 1 terabyte version of it all. So you guys need to find out what you're holding on your internal hard drive, and you need to get, if you don't desperately need to keep it there, get it off. Questions about this? All right. Back in Photoshop. Cursors. Next important thing. So in cursors, your next thing down on your list, you do want to keep this as a normal brush tip, not a full-size brush tip. The problem with a full-size brush tip is, you know, every time you select a brush in Photoshop, you get a little circle that shows you the brush tip itself. However, that little circle doesn't give you any indication of how hard or soft the brush is. If you do a normal brush tip, you'll have a very intuitive size, about the size of the brush. If you go to full-size brush tip, what it'll do is it will actually go all the way to the very edge. If you're using a really soft brush, no matter how faint the ink laydown of the very edge of that brush is, the circle that shows that brush will be on that very edge. And it gets to be very frustrating because you will continually believe that your brush is painting too small when in reality you've simply set this thing wrong. You also want to click and say show crosshair at the brush tip. We do really exacting work here. This isn't just for brushes. This also applies to the clone stamp tool, to the healing brush tool, all the tools. It puts a small little X in the very middle of that allows you to target that brush on a very specific spot. So you definitely want to do that. Then over here on other cursors, you may be in love with the paintbrush that looks like a paintbrush, or the fill that looks like a bucket, or the magnifying glass that looks like a magnifying glass, or all that cute little shit. All of that cute little shit has no place in a professional working environment. You want to select precise. Who the fuck knows when you're using the eyedropper tool? Is it the tip of the eyedropper? And where is the tip of the eyedropper? I mean, it's just insanity. Nobody works this way. You want these things to be precise, period. And so that's what you check. And then finally, the rest of that you can leave as it is. Transparency and gamut, we're almost there. By default, Photoshop has a gamut warning. Now, we have not gotten into color yet, but basically, if you imagine, how many colors can my monitor show me? That would be considered a gamut. It's a space. There are systems, like my camera, for example. My camera can actually capture colors that my monitor can never show me. You guys probably have this experience better with printers. Your monitor can show you stuff that a printer can never print. So that discrepancy is all what we would call out of gamut. If you've got a color that your monitor can show you, but your printer can't print, and you want to know what those colors are, that is where this gamut warning comes in. The default, though, is this middle gray, and you put a middle gray on an image that's largely got not a lot of color in it, and you will never be able to see where it is. If you put your out of gamut warning as this shocking neon green, you can't miss it. To change the color, simply click on the color patch. You'll get the color picker to come open. In the color picker, when it opens up, you will see 4 sets of color coordinates, 3 of which you can change. You have HSB at the top, hue, saturation, and brightness. You have RGB underneath it, red, green, and blue. You've got LAB, we'll talk about that later. And then you've got CMYK, and you can't really change the radio, you can't really pick these things and change them per se. But on this one you can. So if you click on the inside the red little dialog box, so the red value right here, it doesn't matter what value you have in there, hit a 0. Then to go to the next little box down, don't try to pick it, just hit your tab key and type in 255. Hit the tab key one more time to go to the little blue box and put in a 0. This gives you a pure green. Mathematically, this is as pure green as you can get. And then simply say OK. Now your out of gamut warning will actually be flagged in a fluorescent green, and you can actually see it. We will look at this a little bit later on. We actually might be able to get to it today because we're pretty close in getting through all of this. The last thing that I'll give you is the last one down, and your units and guides here. Now, a lot of you, I think, know that you can have, when you go into Photoshop and you're working with an image, you can have different zoom levels of your image. You can have 100% or you can have 50%. It just makes your image bigger and smaller. It doesn't really change your image, it's just the view of it. That's the only thing that's really changing. But never is a time where you've gone in there and you've thought to yourself, well, if you use the ruler, well, that's not an inch. If you need your screen to match what's really happening, you've got to change these values, because these values were created for monitors that existed in the 1970s, and they haven't been updated since. So if you want a real correlation between the two, this is how you do it. Again, I'm not suggesting, I don't do this. I'm just going to throw this out to you. Depends on how crazy you are about this stuff. If you're really more graphic oriented, this actually has probably greater impact on you. If you want your ruler to look, if you want an inch on your screen to look like an inch on your screen, to really be that inch, then this is how you actually fix that. The thing that's the trick here is that what screws everybody up is this thing right here, the screen resolution. This is the only thing that you need to worry about. By the way, all the settings in here are strictly how your stuff is viewed. They don't have any impact on your image. You can change shit here all you want. Your images will be unchanged. The little zoom level might be a different figure, but your image, well, you're not going to hurt your image. You're not going to change it. You're not going to resample. You're not going to do any of that to it. But again, if you want the two to actually make sense, what you need to do is you need to find out the resolution of your monitor, and then you actually measure your monitor. So if we're looking at my laptop right here, this little laptop, what I would do is I would measure the width of my screen. Here, I'm going to do it on this guy right here. Imagine this is the front of the screen. I would just measure across the real screen, the width of my screen. On my little laptop right here, it's about 12 inches. That's the width of it. So then you go up to your, in my case, Apple. You can do all of this on Windows if you want to, and if you can't figure it out, just reach out to me. We'll get together and figure it out. You can do About This Mac. Take that back. You can do System Preferences, and you can click on your display. And when you do, you're going to click on Display Settings. I have 2 sets of them right now because I'm connected to a printer. So I'm going to actually do this for my MacBook Pro right here. And you can see in the scaling version of right here, I've actually changed mine. I don't keep this at its default. But if you click on this to make it, this could be a world of hurt right now. Oh, actually I did that for the wrong thing. So I'm actually do my MacBook Pro right here. Hang on one second, guys, because this is going to fuck all of this up. So hold on one second. I got to undo that. Yeah, now we're back. Onto my MacBook Pro, and I'm going to look at what the resolution is on my MacBook Pro. That's exactly what I just did, isn't it? Somehow I need to undo this. I got to get rid of that so you guys can't see it in order for me to do this, which is going to be a problem. So I'm going to have to just talk you through this. So do this on your computer. If you've got a Mac computer, if you're a Windows computer, you can overlook someone else. But hang on one second. Let me undo that damage. So, this would be a good time for a 10-minute break, hard break, 10-minute, till I can unring this bell, and then I will get back and we will finish up. So I've got, I'm going to call this quarter after, be back at 25 after. At least I got us back to where I needed to be. So we were trying to get through what the setting for your screen resolution should be. And I said if you simply go up to your system preferences and get the correct display, not the projector, but the display for my screen, I've got my text set to being a little bit larger, but if you hover over the number, can you guys see that 1280 by 800 that pops up right here? So this will be on your settings, however you set it. If you have your default, if you have it listed as default for display, you might not be able to see this, but if you do the scaled version, it won't change. But if you, again, hover over this, it should give you the pixel dimensions of your screen. And so what this is telling me is that my screen width is 1,280 pixels wide, and that my screen height is 800 tall. That's what I'm looking at right now. So I take out a tape measure and I measure the width of my screen. You could do the height as well. It's just easier to do the width, not the diagonal, but literally the width, side to side, left to right. Again, I'm going to guesstimate mine and say it's about 12 inches, but you would want to be specific. It's 11 3/4 or 11 1/2. Measure it for whatever it is. Then simply go to your little handy calculator, and in your calculator you take the width of this, which was 1280, 1,200. So again, I've got 1,280 pixels that are the entire width of my screen. You divide that by 12, which is again the inches of my screen, and I come up with 106 pixels per inch. That is the real screen resolution of my screen. So I close that up and I come back to here and I type in 106 in my screen resolution. And if you do that and then you open a file up in Photoshop and you set your zoom level to 100%, 1 inch of your screen will equal 1 inch of, if you had printed that thing out, or whatever it is, its size, they will be the same. They will connect. Again, there's not a ton of real reason to have this happen. It doesn't necessarily make as much difference to us. It doesn't change your image at all. You can still zoom in and out of your image. It doesn't matter at all. But if you're that kind of person that you really, for some reason, you need it to be that way, then you've got to put in the true screen resolution that you have, and that is how you figure it out. We good on this part? Woo! And you think we're done. Not yet, but we're getting there. If you come down to technology previews, they've moved what is used to be down there. So now at this stage of the game, you can say, okay. And you would think you would be done, but you're not. As a matter of fact, the most important thing, well, not the most important, but just as important as anything we've done, is in a completely different place. So on a Macintosh, it is now the edit menu. So click on your edit menu all the way down at the bottom where it says color settings. You need to open that up. In Windows, it's also in the edit menu, but I think it's separate from the preference settings. I think it's the second line. Is that true, Mario? Is color settings all part of preferences then? Okay, well, so anyway, we're going for color now, color settings. So in a Macintosh world, by default, if you click on the drop-down settings, these are a set of canned settings. By default, if you select General, North American General Purpose 2, this is what Photoshop ships with. This is giving the baby in the cradle a live hand grenade and letting go and walking out of the room and hoping that things don't go badly. This is your worst enemy. This is how you fuck up all your files. And not only fuck them all up, but also turn off any warnings that you're doing so. And it's the default. So again, one of the liabilities you have when you reset your preferences, because you're going to remember, yours is going to be set right today. But if you have to reset your preferences and you don't remember to go do this, you then have again handed the baby a live hand grenade and walked out of the room and are hoping for the best. So the problem we have with this, number one, is sRGB is our working space. It is the smallest group of colors that you can imagine that you are saying, that's what I want all my files to be in. So your camera, which can take this huge, gigantic world of color and bring it into Photoshop and actually just crush that fucker down. And we're not going to tell you that we're doing that. So, sorry, but all that glorious, all that money you spent on that camera, you didn't really need it. So the first thing we're going to do is change this from sRGB to Adobe RGB. We work in Adobe RGB here. The truth of it is that there are people, is anybody in this room working in ProPhoto RGB? Most of you, a lot of you actually are, and you don't know it, because all of you are doing it in Lightroom. But nonetheless, we're going to talk about that. The problem with ProPhoto RGB, and we'll talk about this when we get into color a little bit more, is that the color space is so large, it actually is larger than what your eyes can see. It's way larger than what your monitor can ever show you. But Photoshop doesn't know that. Photoshop is capable of actually pushing color into any space. So Photoshop mathematically can keep making that red more saturated, more saturated, more saturated, even though your monitor can't show it to you and your eyeballs can't see it. To Photoshop, it's just a number. But to us, that matters. So do you really want something happening that you can't see? Probably not. Do you really want to crush your photos and throw away half of what you spent all that money on your camera to do because you had the settings wrong? Anyway, so we're going to change that to Adobe RGB. Then we're going to change all these color management policies, because you can see right now, I'm going to just give you the canned version and you'll see what changes. So if we go from North American pre-press and you take a look at it, you can see all these warnings down here about if a profile is mismatched, do we ask when opening? If a profile, all of these are unchecked. So you can have all sorts of color chaos going on, and Photoshop's just going to do it. If you change this North American general purpose down to North American pre-press 2, this is the other problem I have with this. Could they make these things sound any closer to one another? And what's up with North America? Does that mean if I'm in Europe, this isn't going to work? Right? Okay. Anyway, if you change this to North American pre-press 2, what it'll do automatically for you is change your RGB color space to Adobe RGB, which is what we suggest that you do, and also turn on all of your mismatch warnings so that when you do something stupid in Photoshop, it warns you, and then if you want to continue to do it, you can, but at least you know that that's going to happen. This is how you need to have this thing set, and then say, okay. And you would think we're done. No. Up to the edit menu again, and guys, I'm not entirely certain where this is on Windows, but if we can't find it, it should be still in this stack where you guys are, because Windows is very good about trying to group this stuff together. If we come down to keyboard shortcuts and open this up, for me, the number one here that I do is use legacy undo shortcuts. And what this means is that forever in Photoshop, if you did something, so let's say I blurred my image, and then I didn't like it and I wanted to undo it, I would hit Command Z and it would undo it. If I hit Command Z again, it doesn't go back another step in history, it actually puts the blur back on. So Command Z just goes back and forth from the last state. So blurred to unblurred, blurred to unblurred, blurred. It just goes back and forth. That's how Command Z works. If you want to go back progressively in history to when you very opened your file, you have to actually add the Option key to it. So you would do Command Option Z and go back. This is just a preference for me. I grew up with Command Z for 20 years, and so I use this because they just reverse the process. If you don't check this, then Command Z will simply step you all the way back to the very beginning. Command Option will then just flip back and forth between the two. But again, it depends. If anybody has any experience in Photoshop, this was a pretty unwelcome change in here. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Back up to the Edit menu again. One last thing down to the menus. And they've actually moved this, so it's not there. I'm going to do one last thing down at Toolbars. Yeah. The last thing I'm going to show you here is for the toolbar. So in the toolbar part, it's the toolbar that sits over here. You can modify it. You can get rid of tools. You can add tools. You can move tools around. So most of you guys know if you come over here and say, for instance, if we click the, this is the selection tool right here. So you can see in my selection tool, I've got the rectangle marquee tool, the elliptical tool, single, right? You know that's been forever in Photoshop. If I jump out of here and click on this drop-down menu, they're all right here. However, I'm sorry, this one right here, they're all right here. It's these guys right here. If you never use the single column or the single row tool, whatever, you can modify it by going up here to the toolbar, and you could simply take this out, and you can take that out. And now if I say done, those two are gone. So I can click my drop-down menu and I don't have them. So it's a way to streamline that. If you've screwed everything up and you got, oh my God, I just got to do it, just click on, open it up again, hit Restore Defaults. It will move those things back into place and you'll be able to. But if you are missing a tool, this is where you go to find it. Are questions about this? Okay, really quickly, we are going to build a custom workspace and that'll get us through the end of the day. So I'm going to build you this space that looks like this. However, I need to start where you guys are. So I'm going to guess, if we take a look up at the Windows menu down to Workspace, so everybody do this with me, up to Windows, down to Workspace, my guess is that you've got Essentials as your workspace. There's a series of canned workspaces in here, and basically what they are is it's arrangements of these palettes, but it's also the tools that are available to you are what are baked into these canned workspaces. So do most of you have Essentials? Is that what you're working with right here? So I'm going to click on Essentials so that my screen looks like yours, but you need to know this about changing workspaces. It's always a two-step process. I've now just changed this, but now I need to reset this. So back up to Window again, Workspace, and this reset button will change to whatever workspace you have picked. So because I picked Essentials, this is now saying Reset Essentials, and I'm going to say, yes, I want to reset the Essentials. The next thing we're going to do is come up to the Window menu again, click on the drop down, and down here at the very bottom, you need to make sure that Application Frame is checked. If you uncheck Application Frame, what ends up happening is you can see through Photoshop's workspace to anything else, to whatever else is running, be it the Finder, be it my system preferences, be it the recording software that I'm using. This is a nightmare because, again, you are allowing content that you are not controlling in either Photoshop's UI or your image to impact your visual judgment of this image. So you need to make sure that that application frame is checked. The other thing about the application frame is it anchors all of your palettes. So if you come up to the top, come up right next to the word that says Adobe Photoshop and click on that area right up here, you can move this whole thing around and you will see when you move it around, all of your palettes move with it. Everything is connected. If you double click on that space, again, I don't know that this works on Windows, but it does on Mac, it restores it to being as large as it possibly can without you losing any of your palette space. So it is a way to ensure very quickly that you can see the most of your workspace possible. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, this part's going to go pretty quick. If you get lost, don't worry. It'll be in the video. You'll be able to follow it again. But the thing about doing modifying our workspaces right here is that right now the palettes that we've got that are showing are anchored to the frame. It's very difficult to, if we unanchor all this stuff and move shit around, trying to re-anchor it is incredibly difficult. So the method that I'm going to show you gets around that. So the first thing we're going to do is to look at the two little icons that are sitting all the way over. They're on the top right-hand part. They're two little thumbnails, icons that are sitting here. These actually represent palettes. If you click on the top one, it is your history. And it'll fly out, so you'll get this palette that flies out. I want you to click on the tab that actually says history, click and tear the whole thing off. Comments did not come with it, so we need to now click and tear comments off as well. I want to get rid of that. Comments we don't really care about right now. In other work you might, but right for our work we're not going to do it. So that little X that is up by the tab that says comments is how you get rid of it. If you click on that, it gets rid of it. If you say to yourself, oh my God, I didn't want to get rid of comments, or you got rid of history and not comments, simply go to your window menu, click on the drop down, and you can come back down and comments will be right there, as will history. So whatever you screwed up, click on it and it brings it right back. So it's not like you're losing this shit. Anyway, we're getting rid of comments. That guy's gone. Don't want it anymore. I'm going to then come over to properties, and I'm going to click on properties, and I'm going to leave properties alone right now. I want to get rid of some other stuff. Up at the very top again, swatches. I'm going to click on the swatches tab, pull it out onto my screen, and kill it. I'm going to then do gradients, tear it out again, and kill it. I'm going to do patterns, tear it out again, kill it. I want to keep color here because, again, this is the anchoring trick. Before I do color, I'm going to deal with adjustments and library. So I'm going to click on adjustments. I'm going to bring it out. How many of you guys use adjustments? These little icons right here. Okay, if you come down, you can't see it right now, so don't do this. Just look up at my screen. I'm going to create just a synthetic file really quickly. Doesn't matter what it is. But down on the lower part of my layers tab right here, I have got this thing, the circle, that is half black and half white. If you click on that, you will get a fly up menu that is all of these adjustments in the very same order. You do not need adjustments. This is robbing you of real estate. They are all right here and will always be there. So tear adjustments out and kill it. We're going to leave library and properties where they are. The first one I'm going to move is properties. I need you to watch my screen when I do this. I'm going to grab properties and tear it out, and then I'm going to bring it up next to color, and you'll see I get this blue border that shows up around it. That tells me that I'm now going to dock properties in with color, and it will be anchored to my frame. Let go. Then you're going to grab the color tab and tear it off and get rid of it. We don't need it. But now properties, by going through all of that, properties is now anchored to my frame. Does that make sense? Grab libraries and drag it up next to properties. Wait for the entire blue glow to go around it and let go. It will then add libraries as a tab to properties, but we deal with properties more than libraries. So even though I'm going to keep library as a part of the workspace, I usually want properties to be visible. Anything that is visible or that's set up when we save this custom workspace will be what shows up when you load the workspace. So I want properties to be visible, so I'm simply going to click on properties to have it visible to me. Then we're going to come down. There is guides now. That's actually a part of all properties. So I've now got layers, channels, and paths. Now, properties doesn't need as much space. So if you hover your cursor between the two sets of panels, There's the property and libraries that are on the top, and then there's layers, channels, and paths on the bottom. If you hover your cursor right between the two, you will get an arrow that goes up and down. If you click on that, once you get that arrow and drag up, it will give you more room for your layers, which is what you really need, than more room for your properties. Properties is usually, it turns out to be curves and that kind of stuff. You don't need as much room. So basically, this is how I set mine up. Then you're going to grab the channel palette and you're going to drag it out in the middle of your screen and just leave it out there. I'm going to get rid of that blank image that I opened up. So the right side of our setup is pretty much exactly the way I want it. Now we need to work on the left side. So on the left side, there's something that's missing that is going to become it's stuff that you need no matter what you're doing in this class. So if you go up to the window menu and you come down to Info, it'll actually open up a palette called Info that's docked to the right-hand side. We don't want to keep it there. I'm going to click on the Info tab and drag it so it comes free. Then you need to watch my screen when this happens. I'm going to drag it over to dock it with my tool palette. You need to get close to the tool palette till you get that blue line again and then let go. When you let go, Info fills the entire side. That's a problem for us, but we'll get to it in just a second. I want to put channels underneath this, and I want to put history underneath this. The problem is that if you grab history, I'm going to put history in the middle. If you grab history, you would think you would want to come down to the very bottom and get that little blue line and select it. That's not where it exists. Again, this is a UI problem that I think Adobe has fucked up, but they don't call me. They certainly don't pay me. So anyway, see this really thin little line that's going right underneath where it says draw rectangular selection? That is where you need to move history. So bring history right under that line, and now you'll see as you touch that little line, you'll get the blue, and let go, and that actually puts it into place. Then you need to grab channels, and there is no other line in history. Channels, you have to grab and drag it to the bottom like you thought you should have done with history. Fuck you, Adobe. Anyway, drag channel down and let go. It will then put channels underneath history. Again, we need more information in channels than we have in history. So hover your cursor over the separation between the channels palette and the history one, click and drag up so that I have more information for channels. And then finally, we're going to go up to the window menu and we're going to come down to actions. Actions is another thing that you actually need. It comes back with comments attached to it. I'm going to click on comments and drag it out and kill it. And then I'm going to put actions along with history. So bring it over on history till you get the blue line all the way around history. Let go. We use history more than actions, so click on the history tab so that it is visible. And this is our retouching workspace right here. I know. You need to save this. To save it, come up to your window menu. Come down to workspace, come down to new workspace, and give it a name. I would call mine retouching. I've got so many of them. I'm up to retouching 29 or 30 right now, so I'm not going to save mine, but you can save yours. Something that's meaningful. So I'm going to hit cancel out of that. And then if you now look at your window workspace, it should show up here in the top. Does everybody have a retouching thing that shows up at the top? So to see how it works, did anybody not get the retouching space saved at the top? We good? Come back to Essentials. Click on Essentials. Workspace. Oh, Essentials. This was the reset that I kept telling you guys about. Second move, up to the window, workspace again, reset your Essentials, and it'll look like Photoshop actually ships. But if you want to use your custom workspace, window, down to workspace, pick your retouching workspace, and then again, window again, workspace, and reset whatever your retouching name is. You are now good to go. I know, right? Say what? Oh yeah, but I haven't finished. One last thing. Where is all of this shit, right? So if you go back to our website, I would be right on time if I didn't have to do the login every. But I realize I'm preaching to the choir here. If you go back to our Canvas site in Advanced Retouching, and you go to the modules page, and you go to our resources for session. I'm sorry, it's the wrong one. That was for the course, but our session number 1 resources. You will see right here, Photoshop preference locations. Where this is all kept is in here. If you open this up, this is for both Windows and for Mac. It'll show you where you need to go. For the Mac OS location, you need to come down here, and what we're looking for here is that this is all the Photoshop preferences right here. This is what contains it all. This is the folder that you are looking for right here. It is inside your user, library, preferences, Adobe Photoshop in whatever version. So if you're in version 25 of Photoshop, you're looking for the version 25 file. I've got folders that go back to, I've got probably 20 of these. So make sure that you're getting it for the version of Photoshop that you're using. Do not remove that folder. You want to duplicate that folder, put it on a hard drive, and you don't have to worry about this shit anymore. Your custom workspace is actually inside it. The problem for for Mac people, not Windows people, is that by default, Apple has hidden your library folder. You can't find it. So to find it, go to the Finder. Everybody do this for me right now because you'll get it forevermore. Go to your Finder, come up to your Go menu. If you click on the Go menu, you will not see library in here. Depending on the version of Mac you're using, you hold down either the Shift key, which in my case is not the correct one, or the Option key, which is the correct one. Library shows up. This is your user library. This is what Apple doesn't want you to see. Select library. It will actually then give you a window that has library sitting right here on it. If you hover next to the word that says library, a little icon will appear. You want to click on that icon and drag this over into your favorites location on the left side, so that way you don't have to remember that keyboard shortcut. All you need to do is click on library and you will go right there. Questions? Oh, so again, you follow this pathway that's right here. So the pathway that is right here. It says to go to your user library. That's what we just got. Scroll down to your preferences. So down to, and make sure that you're doing preferences, not preference pane, but preferences, to Adobe Photoshop. So in here, I'm going to drag mine to the side so you can see mine. You can see I've got settings that go all the way back to 2021. I am in the current version of Photoshop is right now here, this 2024. This folder, you copy the entire folder. It used to be that you only had to go in and copy certain files. Now you need to copy this entire folder and save that to your hard drive. If you open up this folder and you go all the way down to workspaces, you will actually see, you would think it would be under modified workspaces. It's not, but under workspaces, this is where your custom workspace that you just made is saved, and you should see it there. Typically, I will keep these separate, but now that you have to copy the whole folder, it's all together in one shot and you're good to go. So you don't need to separate it out anymore. Are we good on this part? For the Windows people, again, it's just as simple. Just you need to follow that path to get to that folder. Make a copy of that folder. A lot of people just throw it on a thumb drive or on an external hard drive, or just keep it someplace so that, I mean, come on guys, we've spent the better part of 2 hours building this. You ever want to do that again? No. It's all done for you. Last thing we can look at really quickly are just the assignments. We looked at it really briefly before, but it's pretty straightforward. So what I need you to do for next week is introduce yourself to me, set up your system. Basically, you've just set it up. So isn't it nice that I'm giving you assignments that I then do for you with you in class? I know. Love that guy. And then again, start the work on this color primer. We will jump into color next week. Do not try to read this thing in one setting. I'll see you next week. Oh, last word.